Welcome to the G2 on 5G. I'm Will Townsend with more insights and strategy. I cover networking, infrastructure, and carrier services. And with me is Anshel We have 6 topics in about 15 minutes, so let's get started. My first topic this week is Huawei. They conducted their Analyst Summit. It was digital this year, and I found it interesting on a couple of different fronts. One, they spoke to the fact that over the last year, they've doubled their R&D budget. It's actually quite significant. It's averaged about 15% of their gross revenue. They've doubled that. In my mind, that's no surprise because, given the entity listings and the restrictions, they're going to have to make some further investments in their supply chain as U.S. manufacturers move away from them. I also found it interesting that they spoke to their patents, and they claim that they have over 85,000 patents issued since 2019, and they claim over $6 billion in patent expenses related to that, and they're vowing to make that available and really focus on open source. And I think all of that is pretty timely because it has been confirmed now that the U.S. will require licensing of semiconductor companies that use American semiconductor manufacturing equipment, in the supply of a final product there. So, I believe that this is probably these factoids were probably preemptive, given that Huawei was expecting that. And I know, Anshel, that you follow this quite closely as well. Do you have any insights to add?
Yeah, I mean, they have a long road ahead of them. They thankfully are a fabless company, but it's also now a vulnerability and a liability because now they have to find fabs that will fab their chips in China, and I think that's going to be a big hurdle for them long term, because the closest fabs in China to what's happening, what's capable or possible in Taiwan or in Korea is years behind, many years behind. And the gap is only going to get wider as lower process nodes continue to require more and more complex and expensive equipment, which the Chinese fab don't have access to because of entity lists and such. So I'm not even sure doubling R&D is going to be enough for them to overcome all the different hurdles because there's software, hardware, and engineering hurdles that all need to be overcome. And it's a significant undertaking that I do not envy, but it's an unfortunate position to be in for them, and they're just going to have to, try to fight their way out of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, you mentioned their design capabilities, HiSilicon. It's no secret that that's a Huawei organization. It's been design only and it's been fabless, so they could certainly throw, the tens of $billions required to fab up. But to your point, there's some tribal knowledge there that, just the Chinese in general are far behind. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. So let's shift to your first topic of the week, and you want to talk a little bit about T-Mobile.
Yeah, so T-Mobile had their big Uncarrier announcement this week, which was really centered around giving free access to first responders. It's not just like a one-year promotion or a COVID-19 related thing. This is part of a broader strategy from the company where they will be actually doing a decade-long initiative, which is a very long-term kind of approach. But I think that they're looking for customers that they just couldn't get before, and I think eventually what's going to happen is they're going to become the one-stop shop for a lot of places, and they're going to get other paid business in addition to this for services and things like that, in addition to the connectivity, because they're doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, partially because they promised they would. For the merger conditions, but I also think they're doing this because there is a business element to this. And in addition to that, this week they also had someone from the company that makes speed test, Ookla,
Mm-hmm.
actually went out and tested their new network in New York, and he was getting north of 1 gig per second on their 2.5 gigahertz only network, not even utilizing their millimeter wave or their sub 600 megahertz
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So yeah, there's an insane amount of potential there if that's the kind of bandwidth that they're getting with sub 6 2.5 gigahertz. So I'm very excited to see that, and I hope that more places are going to be able to accomplish those kinds of speeds. But realistically, New York is their best network in terms of infrastructure and spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a strong feeling that you're still probably going to look at 800 to a gig just on 2.5, which is still impeccable. And then when you start adding millimeter wave and sub 6, you start getting some really satisfying speeds.
Yeah, that's that's incredible. Given you mentioned we're not talking millimeter wave. An interesting point. I tuned in to the new CEO Mike Sievert's Twitter announcement on all of this, and an interesting thing about this Heroes program where they're offering, like you mentioned, this 10-year access to service. That's obviously that's data service and voice, and 5G as well. He mentioned that the potential savings could be in the billions of dollars, and that those dollars could,
7.7 billion.
yeah, and those dollars could be reallocated to other things. So, I mean, this is pretty significant. I mean, T-Mobile is really putting something significant out there. So, I, quite frankly, was pretty blown away by that. So, awesome, great insight there. Let's shift to my second topic, and this is something that was sort of late breaking last week. Rakuten came out and stated that they were going to see some delays in the rollout of their 5G network, um, blaming COVID-19 for that. What's interesting, just about a month prior, their CEO, Tarek, was interviewed and stated that they felt like things were on track, that they weren't going to see any material effects of COVID-19. So it's sort of interesting, that the conflicting messages that we're seeing just in the span of several weeks. Now, obviously, no one can expect what's going to come with COVID-19, but I would suspect because they're doing things very aggressively using virtualization and Open RAN and that sort of thing, that they're probably running into some roadblocks and some challenges, with the software. I'm wondering if you have any insight into that as well.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult situation. I think they're not necessarily saying why those delays are happening. But I think the reality is that you just have a limited amount of resources,
Mm-hmm.
and things are getting harder to acquire, and things are taking longer to deliver. So it could actually be more of a hardware um, problem than a software one. Even though
Hmm.
this is a software-based solution,
Yeah.
it could just be that they can't get the equipment that they need um, to make this happen in time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm noticing that happening in a lot of places. For example, in the PC hardware segment, power supplies are basically in short supply, um, and because of that, you can't build any new computers.
Right.
Or if you do, you're overpaying for a power supply, or you're getting one that's not to spec. So
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling that might be a part of it. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a weird situation, and especially with the conflicting positioning for management. Um, but I think it's also because some people may or may not be aware of what the challenges are that are currently in place.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to blame COVID-19, and you can't do that forever. We're beginning to come out of this, thank goodness. But that's interesting. I didn't think about that. That it could definitely be supply chain related. I mean, my daughter wanted a Nintendo Switch for her birthday, and they are not to be found. So and that's definitely been affected by the shelter in and COVID-19. So it will be interesting to see how things progress there. But let's shift to your second topic this week, and you wanted to speak a little bit about Verizon and 5G.
Yeah, so they actually made a lot of announcements this week, mostly around improving their network. Specifically around their 5G network. So they announced a couple partnerships with different vendors, including companies like Movandi.
Mm-hmm.
And Movandi is kind of helping them rebroadcast their millimeter wave signal to improve coverage, but also not making them have to drop more fiber sites.
Mm-hmm.
But the big thing was actually that they upgraded their 5G upload to a 100 megahertz block of spectrum from 20
Mm-hmm.
megahertz, which they claim conservatively is going to be 30% faster than what 4G delivers today.
Mm-hmm.
But PCMag went out and tested it themselves and actually got 50% faster upload speeds, which 50% faster is pretty significant, especially when you consider that most of the improvements we've been seeing on network speeds have been on the downlink and not on the uplink. So
Yeah.
50% faster upload is pretty significant. And it also means that you get off the network faster, which means you suck down less power, because
Mm-hmm.
what people don't realize is download takes a lot of power, but
Yeah.
upload takes up even more power.
Right.
Um, so being able to get your uploads done more quickly means your battery life is better if you're uploading stuff, which nowadays a lot of people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think it's a big deal. And that's one of the big benefits of 5G, especially millimeter wave, is having faster upload speeds, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not all about the down anymore. People are doing lots of content creation and sharing.
Yeah.
And if you're on TikTok all day and you make your own TikToks, uploading those is going to happen over the network. You're most likely not going to just be doing them at home.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a big deal, and it's good to see that Verizon's starting to finally upgrade their 5G network and improve coverage, and start to be a little bit more competitive in that space.
Yeah, no, it's. I think it's a great move on their part. You and I have spent time with Nikki Palmer, and every time we meet with Nikki, she kind of speaks to. You mentioned fiber, and Verizon has an incredible fiber footprint, right? So I think this will only help improve, the performance of their 5G networks going forward. So great insights. Let's shift to my third topic of this week, and it's about SoftBank. And boy, what a change a year makes, right? I mean, a year ago, SoftBank was running on all guns, and and now there was word this week around their possible divestiture of their $20 billion position in the equity post merger. With obviously Sprint was a SoftBank portfolio company, and so that's not surprising to me. WeWork has been one of their portfolio companies, and we all know where WeWork has gone. And OneWeb was high flying. They were this low orbit satellite service, and now they're in Chapter 11. And when you look at their Vision Fund performance over the last year, the loss is staggering. It's nearly $18 billion, and that's putting roughly about 15 of their other portfolio companies at risk. So, this doesn't bode well necessarily for SoftBank, but I think I don't know. I mean, if they divest that 20 billion position in stock, I mean, how do you think that's going to affect things? Do you think that materially affects the new T-Mobile in any way?
No, I actually think it's a mistake. I think that they're doing it mostly because they're in a desperate position to take their wins when they have them.
Sure.
They're not acting rationally. Um, Not that very many people would agree that they ever have, to be fair,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because a lot of people disagree with their investment strategies.
Right.
But I would say that in general, the new T-Mobile is just the beginning of in terms of its value.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because if T-Mobile really does deliver what they've been promising for their 5G network, I think they're going to be making some significant improvements in terms of, um, you know, return of capital to investors, share price, profitability, um, customer base. Everything is going to grow, and that's going to
Mm-hmm.
reflect well upon investors. And
Yeah.
selling at, right at the point where they effectively are just starting, it
Yeah.
doesn't really make much sense. That said, Sprint was a poor acquisition on SoftBank's um, you know decision process. It was a quick one, and I think that they made a mistake over leveraging themselves buying Sprint, because they couldn't invest any more money into Sprint even though they needed to, and that's kind of what caused it. Was like the second mistake that kind of screwed Sprint over after the WiMAX situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that SoftBank is just exiting and taking their win because now they can. They don't
Right.
have to, because they bought Sprint. Selling Sprint They did it, right? So at this point, I think they're just trying to take their wins and get out, get their whatever profit they've made, if they've made any, and and get out. But
Yeah,
I think
no,
it's a
yeah,
mistake.
yeah. Yeah, no, I agree as well. To your point, T-Mobile has proven to be disruptive over the course of its journey in the market in the U.S. And it just seems too early. I mean, that $20 billion position could be 30 billion, 2, 3 years out. If they continue to apply that same disruption and that value delivery and consumer now to a broader portfolio, a broader spectrum footprint, and the business acumen and services that Sprint brings along with it. So
Right.
I concur with you on
And
that. So
the
yeah.
one point I wanted to add was their share price prior to COVID-19 hit $100 as a result of their business growth.
Mm-hmm.
They closed the AT&T deal, which was right after COVID really tanked the markets. Their price has already rebounded, and I mean they're at $94 right now, but a couple of days ago they were back at over 100, and they were
Mm,
at a record high. So I don't
interesting.
see this trajectory stopping.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I just don't really see it making much sense. But they may have some things they have to deal with.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, let's shift to your final topic, and we're going to cover all three of the tier ones in this video podcast this week. But it's AT&T, and I think you and I and our principal Patrick Moorhead, we've been a little critical of AT&T with what they've done from a marketing and branding perspective with their evolution, their 5G evolution, or their 5G densification strategy. But you've got some insight there, so would love to hear that.
Yeah. So there's an organization called the National Advertising Review Board, and they're kind of like a self-policing organization for the advertising industry. And they've reviewed AT&T's 5G marketing claim, decision, naming scheme, whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
and they've decided that it's misleading to consumers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically now on AT&T to answer that judgment and explain to all of us why it's not wrong, or just
Mm-hmm.
pull it back.
Right.
And it sounds like there may be a chance, no one really knows, whether AT&T may actually get rid of 5GE as um, marketing term, especially when you consider that they now have 5G in sub-6 with real coverage.
Yeah.
And I believe the main reason why they did the 5GE marketing terminology was primarily because they didn't have any 5G coverage um, previously, because it was all millimeter wave. So they didn't really have anywhere they could show 5G signal. And I think that they were worried that T-Mobile was going to roll out their 600 megahertz network and hold up their phone that we have 5G everywhere and our competitor doesn't. So I think that's the main reason why they did it. I don't think it's good. I think it's a lot of confusion. Initially, a lot of people were like, "Oh, I have 5G on my phone," and then
Right.
that's very misleading. But eventually, the truth did come out, and people started correcting each other and telling them, "Oh no, that's fake 5G. It's not real 5G,"
Mm-hmm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
almost more damaging than not having it in everywhere and every place. So,
Yeah.
our firm, all of us are kind of aligned on our hatred of 5GE, and I'm very happy to see it potentially go.
I think and let's just not single at AT&T. I think there was confusion in the market around in the very early stages of deployment, and I think all of the operators didn't do a tremendous job in keeping the public straight on what it was all about. And my understanding is that AT&T has agreed to drop the 5GE from all of its marketing collateral and push, but that icon will still remain on the phone. So
Which
we'll see
is,
we'll see what happens.
it's still like, I don't know, just almost just as bad, because I mean, people are really looking at their phones more than they are watching ads.
Sure.
Um, so, and the thing that was really upsetting was that there was a point where they realized people didn't like that 5G marketing, and then they just went like double down on it with a heavy ad campaign too. But,
Mm-hmm.
I'd like it to go.
Yeah. Be interesting to see where that goes. But well, great. Well, I think that wraps it up this week. Why don't you take us home, Anshel?
Sure. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. And if anyone would have any insights into new topics they'd like for us to cover, please feel free to reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sog. We're both on Twitter. And if you guys enjoyed this weekend, it's a long one, and we hope you guys have a great weekend. Thanks.